To review for a moment, we're talking about in the Zohar an analogy, that's a beautiful analogy that teaches us a tremendous deal about life. That the Shekhinah, God's presence, is compared to a fire, and the body is compared to a wick. And what is the oil? What unites the flame and the wick is good deeds. And the Zohar Kodesh is telling us that the only way for us to really have God's presence, the Shekhinah, to rest on us, is through the physical action-based mitzvahs. It's through good deeds. That is how we allow the Shekhinah to rest on our physical body. The implication here is that the soul alone, despite the fact that it is a piece of God, literally a piece of God, does not suffice to allow the Shekhinah, God's presence, to dwell within our physical body on the wick until there is Maisim Tovim, until there is the good deeds, which is the oil. But here's our question. If our soul is literally a piece of God, shouldn't it be enough to cause the Shekhinah, God's presence, to rest on the body? Why do we need to do an action if our soul is so holy? So the interesting thing is that I love God is also an identity. We're going to be learning in a few minutes about the idea of how for God's Shekhinah, God's presence to rest, it needs something that's bittul. It needs something that is given up as identity and is really just open and available to take on God consciousness, that it doesn't have an ego that's getting in the way. And so even the consciousness, the identity of I love God, that's also an identity. That's also getting in the way of just being fully a vessel for godliness. A person's soul, even that person is a complete tzaddik, worshiping God with reverence, with awe, and pleasurable love, right? The highest level of love. Nevertheless, that soul still does not lose its separate identity completely. Right? It's still not completely bittul, given over to just be a vessel for God to dwell in. Because even the identity of I love God isn't somehow separating them from God, because it's I love God. I have awe of God. It's not just a total given over vessel for Hashem himself. So ultimately, the soul has a level of self-consciousness which blocks it from being completely one with God. To grasp the truth that nothing really exists outside of God, you have to stop existing. Otherwise, you are the very being. Your very being will contradict the truth you're trying to grasp. It's like a person standing in a mirror proving that they don't exist. So yes, even though they could prove it, the premise is that they still exist. And so using the soul as a way to allow the Shekhinah to rest on my body isn't going to work. Because in a way, the soul does not have complete ability to allow God's presence to rest on it, because the soul carries an identity in some form. Of course, a very holy identity, but nonetheless still an identity. But this is not the case, however, with mitzvahs and good deeds, which are the will of God himself. They are Ratzon HaElyon. They are the supernal will, and they are totally merged with God. The way a person's will is one with themselves. It's not separate. And through that physical action of performing God's will, a person's able to really nullify themselves. They're able to drop that ego identity, even a holy ego identity, and really allow their very being, their body, to be a resting place for God's presence. When God creates something, it goes through many diminishments, right? Tzimtzumim, contractions and concealing of God's light. And this is because without those contractions and concealments, the thing wouldn't feel like a creation. It would feel like creator. Right? It has to go through this process of concealing God's endless light for it to reach the status of a creation. But there's no hester panim. There's no hiding and concealing of God's face when it comes to God's will. Mitzvahs are God's undiluted will. Meaning, if I want to have the most direct connection I possibly can have with God, that is going to be through performing God's will, because everything else is diluted. It's at God's endless light. Everything's God, but it's diluted, it's concealed, it's a hiding of God's face. But God's will, that's him himself, because a person is one with their will, right? And even more so, God is one with his will. That's his, really what we're saying is God's essence. And so when a person is doing a physical action, which is God's will, they are merging with God's will seamlessly in that moment. The meaning of the Shekhinah resting on something, what does it mean that God's presence can rest? Because God's everywhere. It means that godliness and the blessed infinite light is openly manifest in that thing. Meaning from das tachton, from the way we view reality, from human consciousness, godliness is perceivable. Godliness is tangible. God can actually be revealed here, because Hashem's everywhere. But where's God where you let him in? right? So where can I actually experience God? Where can there be a godly revelation in my life where I allow Hashem to dwell? And we're learning that where is that? And we're going to connect to God's will, because that is the thing that's going to be so bittul, so given over, that's actually allowing just godliness to be there without this identity, without this ego. Which means that the things absorbed in God's light has completely lost its separate identity in the presence of that light. So, meaning, it's not about, it's giving up my ego-based identity to identify with God. In the moment, I am just one with God. It's giving up the personality, the ego, for a state of essence. As long as something retains its independent identity, the light of the one God, the Shekhinah, can't rest and be revealed there, because the space is literally taken up. God's not rude. God's like, you're busy being revealed there. That's fine. But if you want me to reveal myself there, I need space. I need to be invited in. And it's through God's will, just one with Him, that we invite God in. We're saying, yes, we want your ratzon here. We want you here. We're inviting God in to really shine and to be revealed in the moment that we're doing a mitzvah. So this next bit is going to help the Beinoni's inferiority complex of really understanding that no, they are not the runner-up to the tzaddik. Their service matters. Their service is the real deal. While at worship, the tzaddik may not be self-aware, and he may be truly, utterly immersed in thoughts of God, right? Very holy, lofty thoughts. The fact that he doesn't feel his identity doesn't mean he's lost it. And this remains as a blockage for the Shekhinah. In fact, even the tzaddik's thoughts about God are mortal conceptions, which cannot grasp the truth of the divine reality. At the end of the day, it's a human mind trying to grasp infinity. And even a complete tzaddik, who is bound to God with great love, cannot be a vehicle for the light of the one God to be revealed. Because in truth, no thought can grasp him at all. Ein machshava tfisa b'chlal. It rhymes. Since this thought exists as a separate being, and reality of God, the true God, is non-dual oneness. And there are no separate beings that he's the only one, and there's absolutely nothing other than him. So a Beinoni might be thinking, well, I can't contemplate godliness the way a tzaddik can. I can't philosophize the way a tzaddik can about God. I can't even hold my concentration and meditation for like 20 seconds, right? Look at tzaddikim, they're just like bound up with God in this ecstasy. Alter Rebbe is like, hold up for a second. They're still using a mortal mind, which is not a tool to grasp infinity. And so the way you can grasp God and connect to God's essence through action has an advantage over in the deepest, most loftiest meditations, because at the end of the day, the mind is not an instrument to grasp godliness. You can only you need to use the right instrument, the right tool, and the mind is not the right tool for infinity. Action is. And so this is helping the Beinoni realize that it's through their actions that they can become one with God, even in a deeper way than these lofty meditations of a tzaddik that they might have previously been jealous of. Like a holy jealousy, but still, we have to empower the Beinoni. That's what this chapter is about, empowering the Beinoni to really own their life, to really own their mission. So separate consciousness is an ineffective tool to grasp the reality that there's no separate existence. It's like proving you don't exist, like we said, while you're looking in the mirror. The logic might make sense, but you're there. So yes, we can contemplate how there's only God, and we can talk about and philosophize how there's only God, and it's all beautiful, and that's what we're doing in Tanya. We're really meditating on these deep concepts. And at the end of the day, that's not going to allow us to become one with God. It's still going to be my mind and God. But what we can do is through the level of action, we can become one with God's will. God's presence rests through observing the mitzvahs, which are the undiluted will and wisdom of God, without any hiding of God's face. If I want pure godliness, undiluted, godly revelation, that's going to be in the power of action. I remember I think it was Rosh Hashanah, or one of the holidays, I said to our Chabad rabbi, I just, beginning my journey of going to shul and connecting with my Jewish roots. And I said to him, Rabbi, inspire me, tell me a nice idea of Torah. He jumped up. He's like, enough thought, time for action. And it showed me this exact idea that as much as you can grasp with thought, is nothing compared to what you can grasp through a single positive mitzvah action. Torah study is a mitzvah that involves your two inner garments, right? Thought and speech. And so therefore you're allowing your thoughts and your speech to be a place for God to rest. They're bottled. They're given over to be a home for God in that moment. And yet action-based mitzvahs, oh, where is that? Because we're talking all three soul garments here. Thoughts, speech, and action. A complete Markava, a total divine chariot for God in that moment. I'm giving over my thoughts and my speech and my action to really just be a vessel for God in this world in that moment of doing a physical mitzvah. Action-based mitzvahs pull the light and glimmer of the Shekhinah upon your body and your animal soul. So now we're really starting to get to the crux of the advantage that the Beinoni has. In the moment your animal soul is engaging in a mitzvah, the evil which is temporarily transformed to good, the evil within the animal soul is temporarily transformed to good and is absorbed into holiness like the divine soul itself, okay? In that moment, it's like you have two godly souls. The animal soul is totally given over to holiness. It's absorbed within the holiness of that mitzvah. And the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests on the animal soul because it's the thing that's performing the mitzvah. Without the animal soul, the divine soul has no influence over the body at all. The godly soul can want to be as holy as it can be, but it can't get anywhere. It can't actually do a physical mitzvah unless it gets the body and the animals, unless the animal soul gets the body involved. And so it's actually the animal soul which is the key player here. So the divine soul, it's purely spiritual, and the body is only physical and material. So we need an intermediary. We need a translator between these two realities, and that is the energizing animal soul, which interacts with the blood found in a person's heart and the rest of the body. It's now going to allow this physical body to have this divine experience. It's the translator between the spiritual and the physical. The animal soul is the key player when it comes to doing physical mitzvahs. The animal soul provides a crucial function enabling the godly soul to communicate with the body. And that's why the Shekhinah is able to rest on the animal soul. So what are we doing here? We're taking our animal soul, which still has the evil within it, and we are now drawing God's presence onto that animal soul. And you're like, whoa, hold up. You can't draw God's presence onto an animal soul. There's still evil within this. This is not a godly, it's not a tzaddik's animal soul. This is a Beinoni's animal soul. There's still evil within it. You can't draw God's presence there. And yes, you can. Because it's the animal soul that is the conduit to allow this body to have this godly experience, to allow the body to do this mitzvah. And so therefore, you're able to draw the Shekhinah even onto the animal soul, which still has evil lodged in the left side of the heart. So the conclusion we have come to here is striking. Without a mitzvah, even a tzaddik can't cause the Shekhinah to rest on the divine soul. So even though the soul is a piece of God, it can't allow the Shekhinah to be there because the soul's identity blocks the Shekhinah. It's not totally given over. Yet with a mitzvah, the Shekhinah will even rest on the animal soul and the body, which is from Klipa. Okay, so this is really showing us the advantage of the Beinoni's animal soul. Not that the tzaddik doesn't have an animal soul, but we're saying the untransformed animal soul of the Beinoni. So this leaves us with a begging question. Why does the Klipa of the animal soul, an energy which conceals and opposes God's unity, not cause the Shekhinah to be blocked? Why isn't the Shekhinah like, sorry, I'm not going there. I'm not going to rest on the animal soul because there's evil. There's Klipa there. I can't rest there. That's not a resting place for me. Why is the evil within the animal soul not a blockage for the Shekhinah to dwell? Because even though the deep core of the animal soul found in your heart, namely its negative traits, still has not been absorbed into holiness and they remain a force of Klipa, nevertheless, it's still possible for the Shekhinah to rest on the animal soul and its powers. Why? Because they have been coerced. Let's go deeper into this idea. What is happening with the animal soul in that moment of doing a mitzvah? So Klipa's will is to conceal God, which is why under normal circumstances, it would block the Shekhinah. But when the body observes a mitzvah, right, when they're in the middle of doing that mitzvah action, the animal soul is simply overpowered and forced to act against its will by the divine soul. Right? It's a takeover. And in that temporary state, even the animal soul can manifest the Shekhinah since unwillingly it's participating in the mitzvah. So yeah, al karcha, it's against its will. It wants to oppose godliness. And yet when the divine soul is able to rule over the small city, at the end of the day, it's the animal soul in the body that's doing the mitzvah. At the moment of the mitzvah, the deep core of the animal soul and its powers are in a state of exile and dormancy. Therefore, it poses no interference. It has its powers are dormant in that moment because the godly soul is shining through to the body. Shining through the animal soul to the body. But why then is the deep core of the animal soul crucial and indispensable to the mitzvah? It appears that the deep core wasn't involved at all. It just didn't get in the way. It's like, bravo, animal soul. You just didn't get in the way. But why is that still allowing the Shekhinah to actually shine through the animal soul? It's like, good job, you got out of the way. It's like the shadchan that says you should, the matchmaker that says you should give me money for that match. Like, why? You didn't set up the match. No, it's for all the things I didn't say. Right? It's not like I helped make it happen, just I didn't get in the way. It's all the negative things I didn't say to ruin the situation. Sorry, it's a bad joke. Okay, so it's like the animal soul just didn't get in the way. So why is that enough to allow the Shekhinah to dwell in the animal soul? So what happens is like this. The specific power invested by the energizing animal soul in observing the mitzvah with a specific part of your body becomes literally absorbed in God's light and seamlessly merged with it. Meaning, in that moment of giving tzedakah, your fingers and the energizing animal soul embodied within your fingers is literally absorbed in God's light in that moment. And so the rest of the animal soul, including its deep core, is it's not literally absorbed in the Shekhinah since it wasn't directly involved in that mitzvah. But since the animal soul's powers are ultimately one entity, right? You can't really break up the body. It's one entity. A glimmer of the Shekhinah does spread to it into the whole body, meaning whatever part of my body is involved with that mitzvah, and therefore the animal soul is involved in that action, through that glimmer of the Shekhinah spreads to the entire animal soul and to the entire body. So what makes the Beinoni service so special is that through this act of doing a mitzvah, they're drawing God's Shekhinah onto their animal soul. And their animal soul is not a refined animal soul. Like you said, there's still evil within it. And therefore, they're able to draw godliness to the darkest, deepest depths. As we're going to learn in the next chapter, the ultimate purpose is to bring God's light into the darkest moments, into the darkest spaces. And so they're able to turn something which is still unrefined, which is the negativity of their animal soul, and they're able to bring God there, which is a feat that the tzaddik can never do because their animal soul is already refined. It's already in a state of total holiness and goodness, versus the Beinoni is able to draw God's presence into the darkest depths, into the evil within their own animal soul. And so the Beinoni could go do it kicking and screaming and say, no, but I want to just be pure and good and holy like the tzaddik. I don't want to have any evil left. And God says, no, I want you to build me a home within the darkest spaces. I want you to draw me into your animal soul, your unrefined animal soul. So we have to let go of my notion of like wanting to be holier than thou, like the tzaddik, and really asking, what is God actually asking for me? God is actually asking me that I draw him into the deepest depths, that I draw him into my supposed negativity. How? It's through doing that mitzvah action, because in the moment of the mitzvah, my entire body and animal soul, as now having the Shekhinah, God's presence dwell within it, and therefore I'm bringing God's presence into my entire being and all that comes with it. Thank you for taking the time to explore today's Tanya.